When I was 7, I called 911 on my friend's mom who was beating my friend bloody with a switch. What did you get in massive trouble for as a child, only to commend yourself for as an adult? When I was in the 1st grade, I tackled the crap out of a 5th grader who was beating up my friend Matt on the playground at an early bird before school program. When I say tackled, I mean I blindsided this kid at full speed on tarmac. He got all kind of messed up on impact. I got suspended for a week as a 1st grader. When my dad came for a meeting with the school principal, Dr. Mac, she asked me if I would do it again. If I had said no, I would have been allowed back to school earlier than allotted. I proudly said yes, I would do it again because I was defending my friend. I got a 2nd week suspension. To this day, I'm 29. My dad still talks about how 1st graders don't just go around beating up 5th graders, and that he would always be fine with me getting suspended for standing up for what I believe in. In high school, my girlfriend and I were in the process of breaking up. We were chatting on AIM and she wrote, "I'm so depressed. Goodbye Sat Night Ride. I'm going to meet God." I called 911 and said she was trying to kill herself. The cops came and all that craziness, and her parents never forgave me and forbade me from seeing her again. I still feel like I did the right thing. Her parents never forgave me and forbade me from seeing her again. Yeah, not like you saved their daughter from freaking killing herself or anything. I called the cops on my stepdad for beating my mom senselessly in the hallway. He was coming after me while I was dialing, and after I got off the phone, my mom came in the kitchen with me and started screaming and yelling at me like that was the wrong thing to do. As all of this was happening, she was bleeding and was bruised up all over. I got in so much trouble for it. I didn't know what else to do. My brother and sisters were crying and holding each other in the back room. The cops didn't really do anything besides ask him to leave, which he did. You should have told your mom that you saved her freaking life. When I was 14, I called 911 on my father because he was bashing my head into a wall. I had put up with abuse from him since I was 4 years old, and I wasn't wanting to deal with it any longer. The police showed up, told me that I was a problem child, to never call them again, and when they left, my father continued to beat me. I left the next day, never to return. I called around until I could get a number for CPS, and told them everything. My family no longer speaks to me. They blame me for breaking up the family, and told me that there are some things we just don't talk to outsiders about. Apparently, abuse is one of those things. I felt insanely guilty about it for a long time, but now, I commend myself for stepping up and finally stepping away from the bulls, when nobody else would pull me out of it. Same story. I have just started to let go of the guilt of calling the cops on my dad. I don't have contact with my family anymore either. Major props to you. My best friend always got in trouble for reading in grade school while the teacher was talking. The teacher really didn't like him and would often just yell, "James, pay attention," even if he was staring at her. She did this so much that I began to get defensive and angry. One time when James was just looking down for a second, she gave him detention for reading. I stood up and yelled at her, told her he wasn't reading and that she was being a bully. I got detention too, but James' parents loved me so much after that. I was selling coupons door to door as a teenager to help with cash in college. The kind you get with offers for free oil changes, $500 value for $50, yada yada. One promotion was for a pizza place, a bunch of free discounted items for $50. Normally folks would take a look, and if they liked the place or had bought before, they'd consider it. Otherwise it was a closed door midway through my pitch. One house was a mess, unkempt lawn, beat a station wagon, house in disarray. I made my pitch to a haggard mom trying to manage her brood. She quickly cut me off and said her divorce proceedings were underway. The husband was a deadbeat, and she had no disposable income. But she liked the pizza place, said they used to go as a family. I moved on. A few doors later, I turned back, went to her door and rang the bell. She was plenty confused to see me back. I gave her one gratis and said I hoped it helped to get her through the rough patch. Our coupons were tracked, of course, so I got in trouble for a lost coupon and had to eat the profit. A few weeks later, I was near the pizza place and I'll be damned if I didn't see her with all her kids piling into that station wagon with piles of takeout. Felt good, and still does. That is a damned fine thing you did. Thank you. When I was 15, my friend told me that she took a lot of pills because her ex-boyfriend told her to kill herself. I called 911 and printed out the conversation from AIM and showed it to the police. The ambulance went to her house and they said she seemed fine. She had to get her stomach pumped and then do a few months of counseling. Her mom talked to me a few days later and said that I shouldn't have called in, that my friend was fine. It wasn't the first time that my friend had done it, so at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. The only time in my life that this sort of thing happened to me, I didn't do anything because I didn't think she was serious. She was, and she died. So yeah, never hesitate in a situation like this. The consequences of an unnecessary 911 call pale in comparison to the alternative. When I was 10, my mom showed up at my daycare wasted. The staff was just going to let me and my younger sisters go with her. I threw a crap fit and refused to get in the car. I snatched my mom's keys and ran around the building to the playground. I buried them under the slide. The daycare staff was forced to call my grandmother to come get us. Later that night, my mom spanked me so hard I had to sleep on my stomach. I was grounded for 2 weeks. 22 years later, I'm still pissed at her for that. When I was a teenager, I brought a couple of drunk kids to my house while my parents were gone so they wouldn't drive home while drunk. My parents came home and I got in trouble for having drunk boys in the house. I still think I did the right thing. My drug addict sister attacked me. I was 13. She was 17, which was fine. She then proceeded to hit my mom and held a knife up to her throat. I was in shock and will never forget the image of me having the phone sobbing about to dial 911 and my mom begging me not to because she didn't want my sister to get in trouble. I stood there shaking, not knowing what to do for a good 5 minutes because I didn't want my sister to stab my mom. I finally called 911. My mom yelled at me and my sister darted towards me. Luckily my adrenaline kicked in and I tackled her to the ground. I'm also girl, and held her down until the cops came. My mom was so upset with me for calling the police and I still hope I did the right thing, but I'm pretty sure she would have severely hurt one of us. Your mom is an idiot. That was the right thing to do. When I was about 8, I was walking alone down a road toward a friend's house on a hot summer's day, eating a popsicle. The neighborhood bully was in his front yard for some reason, which I needed to walk right past to get to my friend's house. As I walked past his house, he began to call names at me, etc., trying to provoke a response from me. This was typical, and I had anticipated it. I walked straight up to him without saying a word, and hit him in the nose with the popsicle I had been planning on eating as hard as I could. He cupped his bleeding nose, screamed like a little girl, and ran inside. My frozen treat was cracked and ruined. My parents later found out about it. I actually didn't really get into too much trouble. My mother was angry, but my father was pretty proud, and I think he swayed her a little. I ate what remained of the popsicle after. It was still pretty good. TLDR. Gave neighborhood bully a bloody nose using a frozen treat. The taste of victory. The taste of justice popsicle. In 5th grade I was best friends with a girl who had what I now recognize as pretty severe OCD. She would scrub her hands until they were raw and she spent hours after school practicing her penmanship. She wrote very slowly and eloquently and would often go back to erase letters she didn't think looked right. During the standardized tests for the year, we had to fill out these bubbles on the front of the test booklet with our name, address, school and such info. The teacher asked us after a couple of minutes if we were all done. Everyone was except for my friend, so I replied, no. The teacher came over to see that I was finished with mine but that it was my friend who was being slow. The teacher pivoted quickly to my friend and scowled. For God's sake, it doesn't have to be perfect. I stood up, looked my teacher in her cold eyes and said, some people need a little extra time. Be patient. I got 5 detentions for that one. Didn't go to a single one. TLDR. My 5th grade teacher was a peach. She quit teaching after having me in class. When I was in 5th grade there was this kid in my class who had ADD. He was kind of a handful for the teachers and staff, and they treated him badly. One day we were eating lunch, and he was sitting there crushing up packets of crackers. The lunch monitor saw him doing this, came over and started yelling at him and sent him to the quiet table. Then she picked up one of the packets that he had been crushing and threw it all of the way across the cafeteria and hit him with it. I was like, WTF. I wrote a letter to the principal that afternoon and had all of my classmates sign it detailing what had happened and how it made us all feel. She was promptly fired. Finally, a principal with a head on his or her shoulders. My high school liked to brag about how 70% or so of all students who took AP tests got a 4 or a 5. My friend was doing poorly in our French class, and the school was threatening to not let her take the AP test held at our school, even though she was doing 3-level work, which would have been passing and she would have been quite happy with. So the school kept up the high percentage by only allowing the top students in the class to take the AP tests. I told her, in front of the teacher, that she could get around this by taking the test at another school. Then the administration held a special meeting discussing the problem with the girls of the senior class having too much spunk. Same thing happened with my AP German exam. I got many threats asking me not to take it. Things like a bad recommendation being sent to my college, etc. Frick I got a 4 and most of the privileged class got 3s. I was living in rural Canada going to boarding school when I was in high school. It was an international school and my roommate was Iranian. We were at a McDonald's and some drunk guys come in and start yelling sectarian slurs at my roommate. We talked it out with the guys, and everything was cool. Then all of a sudden some random drunk just punches my roommate in the face. The place breaks out in a fight like something out of a movie. We were outnumbered at least 3-1. A bunch of guys were on top of my roommate on the ground. I picked up a high chair and beat the guys with it as hard as I could. We ended up having to go to court and eventually we were all exonerated and the xenophobes got probation. TLDR. I beat a couple of guys in McDonald's with a high chair. When I was 4, in a preschool with other kids my age, there was a bully who would take my toys every day. I'd be playing with a truck, he'd take the truck. I'd be playing with a robot, he'd take the robot. This went on for 2 or 3 weeks, and eventually I told my parents and my grandma. My parents gave me the just ignore him and he'll go away speech, but my grandma took a slightly different approach. She told me to give the kid a knuckle sandwich. The next day, the kid tried to take my dinosaur, but I decided to take my grandma's advice. I pushed the kid down and told him to get away from me. The preschool called my parents and told them what I had done. They set up a beating and my grandma came. She was smiling the entire time. The kid never messed with me again. My dad gave me the same advice in a similar situation. It worked like a charm. Violence is sometimes the answer. My English teacher during senior year was stealing from students by promising them a huge field trip each year and making them do bake sales and car washes to earn it, and then saying they fell just short of the mark, but she'd save the money so another class could get it. She was only raking in about 3,000,50,000 a year on this, but kids were putting in an insane amount of work and I got really upset when I found out. So I told the school. End result, the school responded. They were grateful for my information, but she was tenured and nothing could be done at that point in time. They added it to her file. Even worse, they didn't hide from her who had done it. She gave us a pop quiz essay the next week, gave everyone else in the class an A and gave me a low F. She made the pop essay count for 25% of my grade. I went from A's to C's. I'd already gotten into college, but my college actually contacted me about my third quarter grades and I had to put them in touch with my vice principal to set the record straight. My parents were furious. I was grounded for several days, and they told me that $5,000 from those students was nothing next to risking my future. A few years later, the same teacher was caught on tape stealing an iPhone from a student's backpack and was fired. One reason they were able to fire her was because she had previous complaints about stealing from students. Heck yeah. When I was in 8th grade I went to use the restroom and there was this chubby girl applying eyeliner on her eyes. A few girls came in and mocked her and made fun of her weight. I was listening to all of it while I was peeing. I came out to wash my hands and they were still laughing. And I looked at the 3 girls and loudly said, "You guys are morons. At least she doesn't give blowjobs in the staircase." They were known to do these kind of things. As I left, the chubby girl left too and flat out said to me as she held back tears, "You don't need to say all that. I can stand up for myself." At that time I felt bad defending her, but now that I think about it, I think I did the right thing. You did do the right thing. When I was in 2nd grade, a 3rd grader was picking on the new kid, who happened to be in my class, and wouldn't give him back his backpack, which the kid needed to turn in his homework. I walked up to him and told him to give the backpack back. He said no. I tackled him and began to repeatedly punch him till he let go of the backpack. I got in huge trouble from the school. When I got home, my dad asked me what happened. After hearing that this guy was a violent bully whom I knew I couldn't take in a stand-up fight, and this had been going on for a good week and neither the teachers or the staff were doing anything about it. In grade 8, one of my good friend's mom was struggling with cancer. It was pretty bad and he obviously wasn't taking it well. What 13-year-old would? Anyway, one day after school we were hanging around with a few girls on the front lawn and this kid, an absolutely horrible kid, comes up to us. I can't remember what led up to it, but this kid says to my friend, "You should go home and frick your mom one more time before she dies." I completely snapped. I beat the crap out of him. This crappy kid was smaller than me, so it wasn't fair, but I didn't care. I punched him in the face and knocked him on the ground and let my friend, who was pretty puny, kick him while he was down there. I'm not sure I've ever been so angry in my life. I can't remember all the details, but I know we didn't. Well, I didn't. I was the biggest one, so I was doing most of the damage. Do anything too serious as he didn't have any broken bones or missing teeth. His parents obviously got in touch with the school and there was a big meeting between my friend, the crappy kid, me, all the parents, the principal, vice principal, and the school resource officer. We had to apologize for beating him up and I think he gave a half-assed apology. It was pretty awesome though, as it was clear the principal and VP were not all that angry at me and were clearly going through some motions to keep his parents happy. TLDR, I beat up a kid that told my small friend to frick his mom before she died of cancer. Looking back on it now, though, the kid I beat up was clearly in a crappy situation. His dad was at the very least emotionally abusing him and I'm sure his mom definitely didn't defend him and maybe even helped berate him. That kid had problems and couldn't deal with them. Also, while it feels nice to think about giving a crappy person their comeuppance and teaching them a lesson, he didn't learn anything from it. He continued to be a messed up kid and now has a kid of his own. I'm sure he's going to continue the crappy cycle he was born into. Violence really doesn't solve much. My kindergarten bully has extremely mean, physically and verbally, and the usually awesome kindergarten teacher ignored his actions. Later found out his mother died of cancer when he was 2. His father was an alcoholic, and he graduated from law school and is now a really nice guy. Still, no forgiveness for taking one of the chicken eggs out of the incubator that one might have hatched. I got sent home for getting in a fight on the playground in 6th grade. Parents yelled at me. Felt terrible. Looking back, I was being bullied and the fight was 3 against 1. I managed to give one of the bastards a black eye and the other a bloody nose. He was sobbing. I regret nothing. Never get in a fight with the motherfricking Batman. In high school, about 10 years ago, I wrote a letter to the editor of the local paper, complaining about how our local school administration only celebrated the athletes at our school and not students who had achieved in other areas. I proposed that if the school was going to have mandatory pep rallies for the athletes, they should also make school concerts, art exhibits, plays, etc. mandatory, or at least have some sort of thing celebrating the arts, academics, etc. at the school. In addition to sports, I had no problem with the athletes, I just didn't think they should be the only ones recognized. Anyway, I didn't exactly get in trouble, but my parents told me I shouldn't have sent it, and the principal at the school, who was my good friend's dad, who used to say hi to me in the hallways and whatnot, didn't say a word to me for like a year. Still agree with the whole thing, and never regretted sending it. When I was younger, my little brother decided to get into a bowl of hard candy. The candy was too hard for him to chew and too big for a 1-year-old to swallow. He started choking, so I ran to wake my dad up for help. At the time, my dad had 2 late-night jobs, so he would sleep until 2 in the afternoon. He was angry that I woke him even though I was obviously scared. He didn't get up and started screaming at me, calling me crap. I gave up on trying to get him up and rushed to my little brother. I performed the Heimlich maneuver on him and he suddenly spit the candy out. We both started crying out of joy and fear. 5 minutes later my dad came out of his room screaming, then started to hit me. At the time I got angry at my brother for getting me into trouble. Thinking back on it now, I think I saved his life. I don't regret a thing. When I was probably 10 or 11, I was at a younger cousin's birthday party. One of their neighbor's kids was there, probably around 7, and was really annoying. At one point he bit me on the arm and I just stood up and backhanded him across the face, hard enough to send him to the ground crying. I got put in timeout or some crap and pretty much had to sit by myself for the rest of the party. Later on I found out this kid was known to be a biter and stopped doing it after that. Keep your pimp hand strong, my friend. When I was 9, I went to school one morning to see several of my friends surrounding a little girl who didn't dress like the rest of us. She had obviously dressed herself and had chosen a Christmas dress with mismatched socks and her mom's heels. The kids were taunting her and throwing rocks at her. She just stood there, in her little dress and cat eye glasses, crying. I ran out from the group and stood between her and the others, and I yelled at them to stop hurting her. I was ostracized for years after that incident, and I still look back on it as a defining moment of my life, to stand up for the little guy. I was that little girl, not literally. Sorry Reddit, and you're a goddamned hero. I wish you'd gone to my school, comma. When I was 11 and my little brother was born, I practically raised him for the first year of his life because both of my parents are alcoholics and drug abusers. One night, he woke up in his crib crying, and I ran downstairs to feed him. My mom complained that she was tired because he never sleeps, and she proceeded to yell and yell and yell, swearing incessantly. I didn't want my brother in that kind of stressful environment, so I politely said, please don't speak like that in front of the baby. Boy, did she have a cow. Directed her yelling at me, told me to never correct her because she's the parent. I just took my brother to another room in the house. Even though she really hated it, I don't regret standing up to her like that. When I was 7, I gave a homeless man my cookie at the mall. My dad was so upset with me. He told me all the terrible things that could have happened to me, but I knew I did the right thing. The homeless man thanked me and smiled. He couldn't stop smiling. Sometimes homeless people are only that, homeless. Not all of them are drug addicts. Not all of them are insane. Not all of them are lazy. Some of them are just people who've been given an unfair portion of bad luck in this life. Yet through all of their tribulation, many of them become some of the most grateful and appreciative people whom I have ever had the privilege of meeting. Moved to a new school and stood up for the kids being bullied. I got in a fist fight with a kid who was beating the crap out of mentally handicapped kid. We both were sent to the office. He got a 10-day suspension and 13 stitches. I got 17 stitches but no suspension and commended on it later on in life by the principal after learning the actual reasoning. For reference, I was brought up in a foster care household and have adopted siblings who are also slow. I don't deal well with the abuse that the mentally handicapped receive. Update. Wow. I went to sleep shortly after this post and just got off work this morning and all these awesome responses. Thank you guys so much. It means a lot. I once saved up $20 to get some toy. I think it was a Spice Girls Barbie. At the time I was about 6, I think. To a 6-year-old, $20 takes a long time to collect and is a small fortune. As I was heading into Fred Meyer's with my dad, I saw a dirty looking dude and a hungry looking dog sitting on the ground next to the trash cans. I asked my dad why that man was so dirty and he said the man has no money and doesn't have a shower or a house. And he continued on into the store, and I pondered this for a minute. I ended up giving the dude all my money. My dad, realizing we had made the trip to the store for nothing, and realizing that I had given all my money away, was very angry and I was severely punished in the following days. Still, I feel proud about it. TLDR. I gave a homeless man $20 and got my butt beat for it. Not a single frick given. In the 6th grade, I was in class with my classmates waiting for the teacher to arrive. A boy, Shane, and his girlfriend were sitting behind me and were shouting and roughhousing. The girl accidentally stabbed Shane in the palm of his hand with a pen, resulting in a deep puncture wound, a lot of blood, and a slow panic. Seconds later, our teacher entered the room. Shane hid his hand under his desk and our oblivious teacher began his lesson. Meanwhile Shane and the girl were behind me sweating. I turned around to see the wound and watched as the blood began to trickle and pool into the cup of his hand. It looked gory, so I raised my hand and said, "Shane's bleeding." Our teacher was P. Shane was sent to the nurse and then the principal's office, and our whole class was punished with a writing assignment. The principal came into the room to scold us, going as far as to inform us of what the janitors would now have to do to clean up the bloody mess in the hallway. A few days later, Shane returned from the hospital with fresh stitches in his hand. Turns out the stab wound was so deep that it caused nerve damage, and he lost some feeling in his palm. Shane was pissed at me and threw some insult my way that I can't remember when I saw him in the hallway. I felt bad and we never spoke again until he was expelled later in the year for being a troublemaker. Actually, you know what, I never felt bad about that. Shane was always a dong to me, and I still did that butthole a favor by getting him medical help. He should have been thanking me for speaking up before he lost consciousness and bled out in the middle of class. I don't get why the teacher was mad or punished the whole class. 6th grade makes a bit of a difference. I can see why he was angry now. I at first overlooked that and thought it was somewhere around 2nd or 3rd grade. When I was 13/14 I was living with my dad who had a tendency to emotionally and verbally beat everyone down when he didn't get his way. He had treated my mum really badly, and she had left a year or two prior. After a very heated argument one day, I had PMS and I was having a little teary. He told me that I had to stop crying now as I was bringing down the mood of the household. I told him to frick off. I didn't use language like that usually, so it was a bit of a thing. He went mental at me, so I proceeded to explain to him exactly why his relationships always go badly, because he is a selfish child and a bully, and listed the ways in which he was a generally crap person. In reply, he gave me a shove into a wall. I then proceeded to pack up my things and walk, about 10 km, to my mum's house. I've lived there since. To this day, I am the only person who stood up to him and told him what I really thought. I'm from Morse. Said 6 miles to make it easier for you Americans to understand, or something. It was around 10 kms, which was fairly far, especially late at night. To this day, I am the only person who stood up to him and told him what I really thought. Good for you. I was seriously dating a girl in high school, 3 years, who was very thin and a point ballerina. She confided in me early in the relationship that she was anorexic and at times bulimic, partially because of the stresses of ballet but mostly because her mom would say snide things about her weight, even though she was very underweight for her height. I often told her she should speak to someone and she would say her mother wanted her issues to be a secret. After the first few years of dating we talked through a lot of her troubled thinking and she got to a healthy weight and had stopped purging. One night her mother was mad at me for some reason and asking me to leave her house. She said her daughter had deserved better than me, emo atheist kid, because I wasn't like them conservative Baptist bigots. I responded with a tirade against her neglect and abuse of my girlfriends, at times nearly deadly, anorexia. Her mom was like a deer in headlights and never let me into their house again. I was in this self-defense workshop with my Girl Scout troop or something, and I asked the lady teaching it, scratching a guy with your nails would be a good way to get him to release his grip on you. No way, she said. Here, I'll show you. Scratch me. She grabbed pretty firmly on my arm, so I scratched her as hard as I could. I drew blood. She didn't let go, but then she started yelling at me all like, "Look what you did. I'm bleeding now. You really should think about your actions." And I spent the rest of the day feeling terrible about it. Looking back, she literally freaking asked for it. Always scratch. At best, he lets go and you get away. At worst, you'll at least get your attacker's DNA under your fingernails for the autopsy. I don't believe in spanking. As a parent, I was spanked severely as a child and that type of hitting is not spanking. It's not even borderline abuse. It's extreme abuse. Anyway, on with my story. When I was a kid, my mom and, now ex, stepdad were pretty severe alcoholics and would cram my stepbrothers, my younger brother, and I in the car and go to their favorite Mexican restaurant several times a week. They would get smashed there, and then drive home with all of us kids in the car. We lived in a small town, and had to take the freeway to get there, about 20 minutes away. I was about 8 or 9 when I finally refused to get in the car. I told them they were drunk and I didn't feel safe. My mom would always yell at me and tell me that she was going to be driving because she was less drunk than my stepdad and force me into the car. One day, we had spent the day at the beach, and as almost traditionally, we went to this restaurant. They had been drinking already at the beach, so they were already buzzed by the time we arrived. They were crazy crap-faced, like, way more than usual. I told them there was no way I was getting in the car. They started screaming at me to get in the car and I wouldn't budge this time. I ran back into the restaurant crying, planning to ask to use their phone to call my grandma to come pick me up. One of the waitresses there recognized me and asked me what was wrong. Being very young, I bluntly told her that my parents were very drunk and I was scared to drive with them. She knew I had other siblings and called her manager. He called the police and they came and almost gave them a DUI. They of course would have now, but in the 90s they weren't as strict I think. They got taken home and another cop car took us kids home. I was punished severely. I was grounded for 2 months and spanked pretty bad. Their alcoholism increased severely until I was 14, when my ex-stepdad blacked out and crashed his brand new motorcycle. They've been sober ever since, and I'm 21. I'm glad they're both sober now. It kind of pisses me off that it took losing a motorcycle to do it, and not almost killing their kids every week. Anyway, I felt bad for years for inadvertently calling the cops on my parents. But as an adult, they freaking deserved more. In fact, I hate that I was even punished for that good deed. As a new mommy, I'm utterly appalled, and I hope my daughter is as awesome as I was. TLDR, my parents were crap-faced drunk and tried to get my brothers and I to drive home with them and I inadvertently called the cops on them and was punished severely for it. Now I'm proud of what I did. As a kid, I was really shy and awkward. Shocking for a Redditor, I know. I only had one friend, a girl who lived next door to me, and she was 2 years younger than me so I had no friends my own age. As I got older, late elementary school, my mom kept pushing me to hang out with these girls who lived down the block from me. I would go over there because she forced me to, but these girls were the popular girls who would torment me and make my life miserable, but then act all nice when our parents were around. I would try to avoid going over to their houses all the time, and my mom would get furious at me. Well, in high school they all ended up becoming hard partying, drug using, class failing skanks, and I did great in school and went on to college. Pushing me to be their friend is one thing my mom admits to being wrong about, but only because of how bad they ended up being later in life, not because they were so mean to me. She still won't believe that they were mean. I'm a girl. I don't understand why parents don't believe kids when they say someone's mean. Yeah, kids can lie, but usually not about that type of thing. When I was in 6th grade, my best friend told me that she was going to the mall to meet a guy she was talking to on the internet. She told me not to tell anyone, so, naturally, I went and told my mom right away. My mom told her mom and she got grounded. She didn't talk to me for months after, but I didn't care because I believed that I saved her life, saved her from getting violated. Them people from the internet are dangerous, or so I've heard. I feel this is relevant, but no one got in trouble. Just felt like sharing, so like it if you want. Anyways, I was 7 years old and at the local hockey rink on Saturday for open skating. This kid was skating backwards and I wanted to know how, so I asked. This kid, a little bigger than me, just knocks me on my butt and skates away. I go up again to ask why he did that and he did it again. This time, the third time. 3 strikes, you're out. When I went up and he went to do it again, I grabbed my wrist and uppercut him on his butt, both my arms together. Then I jumped on him and popped him in the face. Both of our fathers were watching. His father told him to knock anything down that moves on the ice. My father was proud. End of story. Thanks. Scumbag dad. I didn't get in massive trouble for this, but I'll throw it out there anyways. My parents took me to a McDonald's when I was around 7 years old. I was playing on the play structure when a 4-year-old came up to me and started pushing me around and punching me. My parents were watching, waiting to see what I would do. My dad later told me years later that my mom was frustrated that I just stood there and took it instead of hitting him back. When my mom walked up to me and asked me why I let him punch me, I said, "He's so tiny. I know I could hurt him if I wanted to, but he doesn't know any better." My mother was shocked. My friend came out as gay and his parents were violently opposed to this. He had a boyfriend in a different state, and his parents banned him from talking to the guy. They cut him off from the internet completely. My friend would put emails on a disk and give them to me, and I would send them to his boyfriend for him, and bring letters back for him from the boyfriend. Huge trouble from that one. BC. The friend's dad was one of my teachers. I do not regret it at all. I freaked out at my stepdad who raised me and split a bunch of family ties. All my life I'd been scared of him and how he had treated me as a young child, but I was getting older. The abuse had lessened with age, and my stepdad had 2 kids of his own. After 9 years together, my mom and stepdad divorced, and he married another woman with a small child, a 4-year-old girl. My mom and stepdad remained civil, and we all played family together. I was about 16 then, and I still had to spend time at my dad's house. I was reading, trying to stay quiet like I did over there, when the little girl comes running around the corner and softly runs into my dad. He snarls at her and shoves her at the nearby wastebasket, and she falls down and starts crying as he yells at her. I lose it and shove him backward, pick up the girl before he has time to say anything, and get in my car and go. I had a talk with the little girl and told her that he did that to me too and that she should tell her mom and that he is being bad while I drove around. I headed back when I knew her mom would be arriving home and handed her off to her mom. My dad couldn't do anything, or else he would have to explain why I left, so he played it cool and I left right after. I've not been back. I heard a month later through my half-brother that my dad's wife had just up and divorced him. He left for a business trip and she was gone when he came back and he had no clue why. I'm still glad about that. I was maybe 9-ish, and my dad took us to his friends for a BBQ. We played with their kids, had fun, but when it was time to go my dad was clearly drunk. His friend knew it and jovially asked if he was okay to drive but didn't offer any objections when my dad said no. At this point I know what's going on, but I'm super nervous. Saying no, or speaking up to my dad is just something you didn't do. Halfway through the ride home I'm scared shitless, and by this time my brother is too because he is all over the place. So we unbuckled our little brother and exited out the friggin' car at a stoplight. Not the safest thing as hindsight. We run to the corner and watch him. Oh god, is he pee? I can see it, and in an effort to get to us he crashes into the light pole. Long story short, we all ended up at the cop shop and his license was revoked for a couple months. When we sitting in the office after the accident I felt so ashamed over how I'd gotten my dad in trouble. Even after a couple officers tried to cheer me up, and even after my mom got there and tried to tell me I did the right thing and she was so happy we were okay, I still was too ashamed to face my dad. It's the rottenest feeling as a kid. I don't know what sort of look of terror I had on my face when he finally came through the door, but he looked at me for a couple seconds and just broke down bawling. Because he was crying I started crying again, and even after he told me he was sorry I still felt horrible about it for years after. Now even though I still remember that horrible feeling I felt, I'm glad it happened because it was the last time it did. Only sort of related. When I was a kid, I was a huge liar and very manipulative. Even now, at 24, whenever my mom asks me anything she thinks my answer is a lie no matter what it is. She'd spank me for lying at a young age and tell me to never, ever lie. So, now, I don't. I tell the truth even when it's disadvantageous to me because it's the right thing to do. My mom and grandmother tell me now that I should lie when it will benefit me. For example, I had a job interview recently. The interviewer asked what I was discharged from the Navy for. It was a general discharge under honorable conditions because I couldn't meet fitness standards. I told him that was the wrong thing to do. What, did you want me to lie? You shouldn't have told him at all. He asked me why I was discharged. Well, you shouldn't have mentioned that you were in the military. And what? Pretended I did nothing from 18 to 24? That's lying too. So on and so on. It may be to my disadvantage, but if I'm going to get a job, I'm going to fricking do it honestly. And that pisses my grandmother off. Well, you shouldn't have fricking beaten me for lying as a child. That's another example of older people thinking they're wise just because of age. You, obviously more virtued than them. When I was 10 years old, I caught my cousin stealing my action replay for my GamerCube. You see, I had owned 2 action replays because my first disc broke, so I had to buy another one. So, in order to discern the difference between my 2 action replay cards, I took a golden Sharpie and marked a golden one on the back of my original action replay card. Well, it had gone missing after my cousin spent the previous day over at my house, and I only kept it in a certain position. Now, my cousin was known for stealing things. Many things in our house were stolen by him throughout the course of many years, but his grandmother, whom he lived with, never believed any of it because no one had any proof. Well, the next day I go to play my GamerCube and I couldn't find my golden number 1 action replay card. I looked everywhere but still couldn't find it. So I told my dad, and he called his aunt, the grandmother of my cousin, and asked her to check my cousin's room for the card. My cousin was sleeping, so she was able to go into his room without him trying to hide it before she could inquire about it, and when she was in his room she found it. I myself was just happy to have my action replay back. Once my aunt came back over to our house that day, but she was furious with her grandson for stealing, and so when she came back over to our house she gave me my card and she said to me, "So, what do you want me to do your cousin for stealing your game? I could beat him up. You want me to beat him? I could ground him for a year if you want." Like I said, I was only 10 at the time, and my dad was standing right next to me when this happened and he was about to interject when I said, "I'm sorry Aunt Carol, but I don't feel as though it is my responsibility to decide how to discipline your own child." My dad was literally stunned and my great aunt glared at me for a few seconds, then left. Later, after she had gone home, my dad hugged me tightly and told me how proud he was of me for being so mature and responsible, and for not indulging my great aunt in her immaturity and inability to raise her own children. When I was 15 I destroyed my father's M lab and kicked his big scary M head friends out of our trailer who were operating it. To this day, I've never tried M. That was in 1996 in Missouri. 10 years later my father lost his life to it, in a horrible way. It may not be me who I'm proud-ish of, but it directly involves me. When I was in the 4th grade I caved into peer pressure and decided to vandalize a car during lunch. Used a rock, wrote frick on the hood of some nice red car. I had no idea whose it was. Anyways, skip forward about 10 minutes, I've been showing some people who've come by what I've done. Even inspired another kid to use a pine cone to write frick on a car, albeit very small, and a friend of mine comes by. I show him what I did, and he leaves. A few minutes later the teacher comes by. My friend had told on me, which I'm glad he did, mostly because everything turned out very well, other than the couple months of torment coming from my parents. My parents' car insurance was able to pay for the damages to the car. The teacher who owned the car was actually incredibly nice and forgave me immediately. If my friend hadn't told on me, I have no idea what would have happened, but I'm sure the guilt would have started to pile up, and if they did ever eventually figure out it was me who did it I probably would have been in a lot more trouble. TLDR. Vandalize a car. Friend told on me right after seeing what I had done. Thankful now, not so much then. I was about 11 walking home from school. I was typically given $10 a week from my parents to spend on lunches at the cafeteria. Back then $10 sustained for 5 days. It was midweek so I had a good amount of money in my pocket. There was a homeless man sitting on the corner. It was roughly freezing temperatures outside in the dead of winter and this man didn't even have a coat on. He was shivering, but he offered me a big toothy smile. He asked if I had any change so he could eat. I told him I'd be right back, went across the street and into a place that served hot dogs and pork sandwiches, the usual lot. I bought the man 2 hot dogs and a cup of hot chocolate, exhausting my weekly funds. The homeless man began crying and took the food from me, thanking me profusely again and again. I watched him sip the hot chocolate, savoring it, and I could see the color return to his fingers as he did so. I could tell he was genuinely grateful. That night I told my father I needed more money for school lunches, and he asked me why. I told him I bought a homeless man lunch, and he delivered a swift backhand slap in my mouth. From that point on my parents arranged prepaid lunches with the school staff so I wouldn't spend my lunch money on things I didn't need to. But I knew in my heart I did a good thing. Even if it meant spending my lunch money that was meant to feed only me, I can still see the homeless guy's cheeks light up under the steam of the hot cocoa, and I visit that memory frequently. You have been visited by the IT lizard. Upvote or experience bad internet for a month. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.